Hey guys, Dave from Nerdarchy, for nerds by nerds, and today I'm hanging out with like the head nerd. I've got Mike Mearls from Wizards of the Coast, lead designer for Dungeons and Dragons. I think some of you guys may have heard of him before. It's a strong possibility. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing pretty well. It's a dark, rainy day here in Seattle, which I actually kind of like. We had a really long, hot summer, so I'm kind of happy that the rain's back. So
I think we got a sunny, chilly day in Jersey.
cool.
It's noon here. It's a little bit later. So I guess we're getting close to Xanathar's guide release. That's coming up, right?
Yeah, it's about a month from now. I think it's like late. It's like November 21st. I think is the this sort of what we call like the mass market release date, like at bookstores. And then I think it's like 10 days earlier if you buy it from your local game store.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what is that like for you guys when you're getting ready to release a new book, a new product? Is it kind of like giving birth? You're expecting for that newborn.
Yeah, no, it's funny. It's like you with a book like this, it's been interesting because we've been doing lots of previews, and so it is always. I don't want to say tense, but it's always a little nerve-wracking because you never know how people are going to react. Now, the thing with Xanathars is the guys at D&D Beyond have done a lot of video previews. So people have seen a lot of discussions about the subclasses. Though we're trying not to go too much into the details of the mechanics. So I think we've seen some of the reaction already, but until the book is in people's hands, you don't really know how it's going to go. So you always want to be optimistic, and it seems so far that people like what they've seen, but you're always worried there's going to be some random thing like something we just totally overlooked or something. You don't know until it's out there if you manage to hit the mark. And so that's always there's always doubt. I mean, I think there's always going to be doubt, even if you're like super confident, like pre-orders are awesome and people love the previews. Like you'll still always worry, like what is like maybe there's just one thing we totally missed, and now it's out there. And there's nothing we can do about it, except take our lumps. So
Yeah, it happens. What are you going to do? But
yeah.
this edition, everything has been play tested like never before. I caught the round table with the Matts and you and Adam, which you had made a really interesting point about in the past you guys would try and bring other people in, but you'd get like one guy that would represent their table, but you're really getting one guy, his opinion.
Yeah.
And how now with all the play testing that you guys do and the Unearthed Arcana, you're able to cast a much broader net.
Yeah, and I think it's been really important because the thing about D&D is, the rules are important to the game, right? But there are a lot of people who play very casually and loose with the rules. And I think it's really helped us with is getting more of that opinion. The people who aren't really going to forums or aren't on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, who are really approaching the game from a more story-based approach rather than a mechanical approach. And I think that's been one of the big things. It's really helped us get a much more diverse set of opinions. Like you said, it's much wider net, and it's been very insightful. And I think the really important thing is when we're talking about things back and forth, it gives us a direction. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel unless people want us to, which makes things. It gives a real nice focus to the work. So we know we're making progress. And so I think it's really helped because it's really taking things from the very theoretical and put them in the real practical sphere, which I think is something that I don't know if you could do that without having an audience that's motivated to come fill out surveys, read playtest stuff, read Unearthed Arcana. It's a huge help for us.
Yeah, I know. I've definitely been. And I'm like the most liberal with the rules, I guess, of our group.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, use whatever you want. If Wizards of the Coast put it out, you guys can use it. We'll see what happens. Y'all want to play lore Wizards? Go for
it. Though the lore wizard may have been a little, we may have kind of pushed the boundaries there a little. But that's also. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, actually speaking to that, like one of the things, like we were kind of harsh in a lot of our early reviews until we got a better handle on what you guys were really doing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, geez, man, why do you keep using the same mechanic over and over again? Couldn't they come up with anything else? And then like slowly but surely, we're kind of old and set in our ways, but it started sinking in. It's like, oh no, they're actually testing, these specific mechanics, and they wanted to test this specific one really hard.
Yeah, and it's also a thing too where like I'd rather have people get like salty about something that is in playtest because then it's so much better to do that when we can make changes than when the book's out there, right? So yeah, and that's kind of part of it. Like there are things like I think the last Unearthed Arcana we released had like a bunch of tiefling variants. And some people were like, "Oh, these are fine," but some people were like, "These, it's just changing the spells that the tiefling can cast, right? That just doesn't seem very interesting." And even feedback like that, like we very much when we're designing that, we're thinking like, what will people think of this? Like when we put it out there, it is for comment. Like we're not putting it out there for you to tell us how awesome we are. I mean, if you want to tell us we're awesome, that's great. I'll take it. But I think sometimes people get a little defensive about it. Like it's almost like you have like the reaction you described and you might feel a little bad, but no, it's okay. Like it's fine. Like we want that. Like, as long as people are being constructive and like, like we said, like if you're like, oh, I'm sick of this mechanic, right? Like that's useful feedback for us, because we definitely do put this stuff out there because we expect it to get kind of beaten up because even if the mechanic itself or the idea doesn't fly, we learn something, whether it's a positive or if it's a negative response. It gives us more understanding of what we can do and what might come next.
So Kendall has a question. I think it's a good one, and I'll probably add to the question a little bit. Any reprinted races and Xanathar's Guide to Everything to help with AL play, also known as PHB +1 rule? And is that a consideration when you guys are putting out new materials? Like how can, like this stuff has been so tested, how can we now make it, so that eventually you can tap into more?
Yeah. So there aren't any races in the book. And that's primarily because the way we build out books, typically we do new races or new race options when there's also a cultural component to the book, like we're talking about a culture or at least going into some depth about it. Now, we didn't do that in Volos, but I think it's something we kind of learned that it would have been nice to have a bit more information on things like the Triton and stuff to kind of give them more of a space in the world. It also it wouldn't really fit in with the book if someone's trying to come into my room. We almost had a guest star on the show. So there aren't any races in Xanathars. As far as the any new ones, as far as the AL +1 rule, that is more. It's not something where we think specifically of like AL +1, like what that might mean in building a character. It's more the philosophy behind it of if you had the player's handbook and this one book, could you make a satisfying character? Like, is that an interesting array of options? And we also want to make sure that between any two books you put together, it's not overwhelming. Really, the AL +1 rule there is for new players. We want them to come in and feel like they don't have to buy everything to play. I think there was a perception before when basically you could use any book you wanted. You'd see AL players using like half a dozen books to make a character, and I think that created a perception that D&D was a very expensive game to get into. I had like anecdotally, I had seen that happen a few times. I think I was at PAX once, and there were these two younger kids watching people play D&D, and one of them said like, "Oh yeah, this game looks really interesting. Oh, but it looks so expensive, right?" Like you could see they were looking at the stacks of books and the miniatures and the battle mats and all this stuff, and they was like, "Oh man, those are exactly the people I want to recruit," right? Like these are younger kids. And so it was interesting to see their reaction of like, oh yeah, seeing like the player with like 8 books stacked up, like that was very daunting to them. And so that's really more where that comes from, is keeping it accessible. We do think of it in terms of, because I think we recommended Dungeon Masters that they consider using that rule, especially if you're starting out. So we want it to be a cohesive experience, but it isn't necessarily like, for instance, we reprinted some subclasses from Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide in Xanathars, but that wasn't necessarily because of the AL +1 rule. That was more because we saw those subclasses were popular and they were world neutral. They weren't so grounded in the Forgotten Realms that removing them from that context would make them look out of place. Because it is more of a mechanical expansion rather than a story expansion. So
I really kind of latched on to what you said there about someone coming up to the table, watching people playing, going, "Wow, I really would like to play this game, but this looks too expensive." And the fact that you guys are cognizant of that, going, "Oh, well, how can we kind of make the table look a little leaner and more accessible?" That's fascinating. And I mean, it is getting a lot easier, but as far as hobbies go, it's not uber expensive. But yeah, if you're trying to get kids into it, dropping $150 on a set of books is a little bit can be a little cost prohibitive.
Yeah, especially when you think of like if you need to buy them all at once. You know, I think our feeling is if someone starts out and they think, okay, my first purchase is $50, like maybe after I've played, because I either got the free rules or I borrowed someone's player's handbook, it's more of a ramp. You know, that's kind of what we want. And I think having the default be any character I'm playing is like 3, 4, 5 really works against that.
So I've been really enjoying Todd Kenrick's videos with you guys.
Cool.
Previewing everything, and I just caught up last night, and I was watching the one on the Hexblade. So that was one that we kind of like argued with when we reviewed the kind of Ted was like, "This is so awesome." I'm like, "What? Your patron's a weapon? That's so stupid." And now, but when I listen to you explain it, and you're like, Elric's sword, I'm like, yeah, that is really cool. But like, there's the part of me that like looks at the story elements and the game mechanics and go, well, they don't really speak the same language in this instance.
Yeah, no, and it's and it's something where like it's a tricky thing to design because in D&D you have treasure acquisition, right? And you have like, you don't really know what someone's going to do in their campaign. So on one hand, it would have been kind of cool to just say, it is a sword that you carry around. But then you also have in the Warlock, there's the at third level you pick what your packed gift, which could be a weapon, or it could be the ability to conjure a weapon. So it's one of those cases where like, and it was interesting to see in the playtest feedback that it isn't a perfect match. Like, and it was kind of really a case of like getting it close enough so you could see that. Because you're having to go back and you want to fit things in the existing system. We don't want to suddenly start changing fundamental pieces of the Warlock to make it work. But it was also interesting that was one of the issues in playtesting. The Hexblade was like one of those ones that it made the cutoff. I think the cutoff we had was something like, it had to be like 70% positive for us to include it in the book. And it was like at 70 exactly. And so you could see that tension. And I don't know if one of the things you do when you're doing a book with a lot of content in it, like I think there's like 24, 25 or something like that subclasses, is you do sometimes take some risks, like where like, okay, we can't completely solve this, but like what we want to do is for the people who look at this and go, this is cool, to make sure that they're happy with what's there. So it was really interesting working on it and making it was one of the things where it's like, I wish we had just like made one tweak to the Warlock when we were designing it, like in the core class. Because that would have made it a lot easier to just say, okay, you have a sword, and then put it in there. But the and I think I may have tweeted about this. The choice between your patron, and then the pack gift being separate, that was kind of the root of it. It's like, if you could align that, it would make that a lot easier. Because essentially what you'd want to say is you do like, you just get the pack gift and that's your pact. So yeah, it was one of those things where, I'll be curious to see what people think of the final version. It is definitely aimed at the cool, like I want to be like the creepy, dark, arcane swordsman kind of character. But yeah, it's not, you don't like, you could flavor it that the sword you're carrying around is like your sword, and then once you hit third level, then you can add that the pack gift class feature. But yeah, those first 2 levels, like it is just, you're just doing pure role playing. There isn't a lot of mechanical support for that.
Now, I don't know if I was remembering correctly or not, but it seemed like in the video you were referencing the Shadowfell much heavier than the original Unearthed Arcana.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the flavor, I think we did revise the flavor a little bit to make it a bit more cohesive. And it's definitely like, I think it because there was a Raven Queen specific pact we did that didn't make the cut. It was below that cutoff. I think we do lean a bit more on the Shadowfell. And the Shadowfell is something which we've been doing a lot of internal development on, talking about it, like what is its nature. When we did Volos, we kind of did this sort of like stealth, like Feywild pass, where like it's part of working on some of the monsters. We talked about like what is the Feywild, what's it like, what are kind of its like cosmic mechanics, so to speak. And we did something similar with the Shadowfell, just this like maybe a couple months ago. Actually, no, longer ago than that. Wow, this year went by fast. It's like maybe more like 6 or 7 months ago. Feels like last week. But so that's kind of starting to come through, and it's also it's what's kind of interesting about being at the stage of 5th edition. We haven't figured everything out yet, so we're kind of building the train track as the train's going. Like we don't have our full cosmology completely settled in. Like we have the big picture elements of it, but the details are still something we're talking about and working through.
Did you ever imagine like being the lead designer of D&D and a huge part of your job actually being a statistician?
No. No, it's funny, right? Like when you think about like my job is ridiculous when I think about it. If I think too much about it, right? It's just like I make up stuff all day and then we attach numbers to it. And then it's like it's real for a certain definition of real, right? Like it can happen in a D&D game. No, it still really blows my mind because I think sometimes you can easily lose track of the scope of the game, like how many people play D&D and how much of a cultural institution it is. And in a lot of ways, it's humbling, right? Because it means like, okay, don't screw this up, right? Like, you don't want to be the guy who killed D&D, or just like made everyone hate it. So, but in a lot of ways, though, it also helps, right? We talked about playtesting earlier, right? Where like we have a game where people, because it's a lifestyle, because it's a hobby, that's really important to people, we can put out material and have a conversation with our players that's a lot more, I think, mature than other games could. I mean, obviously, people will always be salty about stuff. If you so this is an example. Like if you play online games, I used to play a lot of online games, and I just kind of drifted away because I got sick of like just the culture. I got so sick of like, hey, it's a team game, let's be a team, and then you have people screaming at you and people getting mad, and it's just and D&D. It's nice because I think we all kind of feel like we're along for the ride. Like. We want the game to get better. Like we want to have fun. We want to connect. It's more social. It's just it's more positive. I mean, it's not perfect. There are always going to be incidents and we always have to be vigilant. But I think that's what makes the job in some ways more daunting, but also makes it a lot easier because our community is rooting for us, players and DMs want us to do cool stuff. Like, when you're talking before, when you're like, oh, the Hexblade, what, for me, you could say you're being critical, but I think it's coming from a place of you want it to be good, right? You're looking at it and going, oh, like I wish it was this way because then I'd be excited, right? Rather than, people just being negative, right? Like this is garbage and it doesn't matter what you give me, I'm going to be negative and complaining about it, so I think it's a huge help for us. And, on one hand, it's like really overwhelming. But on the other hand, it's like, well, no, it's good because this is what really actually makes it tick.
Yeah, thankfully, our community is not the video game community or some other communities. Role playing in general is, that is one of the best communities that I've encountered online. Yeah. Having done this for a few years and put up thousands of videos at this point and seen, I don't know, I couldn't even tell you how many comments I've seen at this point. Overall, overwhelmingly, it's just such a positive experience and a positive place to hang out and hang your hat, really. So Doug is our editor on the website, and he's got a question. It's actually this one I was going to ask anyway. And it's actually it's my only real concern with Xanathar's Guide.
Okay.
Is there going to be any subclasses or things in that book that we've completely not seen from Unearthed Arcana?
No, everything is all the subclasses have been featured on Unearthed Arcana, and I think the only elements that will be completely new. There are some pieces in there that help guide character creation. Like there's a system that helps you if you want to build a sort of step-by-step history of your character and kind of build more of a narrative. There's that system in there, and I think some of the DM advice is new to the book. I think there's some guidance on when you're giving up magic items, like, what's a good suggested rate? Because I think in the Dungeon Master's Guide, we just have the tables you can roll on, but doesn't tell you like, well, after 10 levels of play, here's like what the average results of the tables and things like that. Which is actually something in Adventures League, speaking, we saw that is a good example of that's feedback straight for Adventures League. Like people from Adventures League, Dungeon Masters were like, my players have too many magic items. Like this is getting out of hand. And so we actually went back and we went back through all of our published adventures and we looked at the Adventures League stuff and tracked all the magic items that the adventures gave out. And we realized, wow, these don't match the tables in the DMG. Like we just weren't, like there was just a disconnect there. So that's something we're fixed going forward. And we're like, okay, we need a little more guidance on this. So yeah, so I think all the pieces that are meant for players to pick have gone through Unearthed Arcana playtesting. And really the book was really shaped by that. There were a couple classes we playtested last year. The Artificer and the Mystic, and both of them actually we did not put them in the book because we saw the playtest feedback. People liked the concepts well enough that we wanted to do, like, we're going to keep doing work on them. It wasn't a case where people just like, oh, we just don't like this, don't do it. But we could see, like, no, especially the Mystic, there's a lot of concern, like there's so many new abilities coming in, the balance issues. We're like, okay, this needs more time. This needs more playtesting. And I think the feats, that surprised me. Like, we did a bunch of playtest feats, and like that 70% threshold, a lot of them, most of the feats didn't cross it. And it was interesting to see how people were very ambivalent toward them, a lot more than I thought they'd be. So yeah, and that's definitely something where we expect, like, hey, you can make an Adventure Z character day one, right? The book comes out, you buy it, you make a new character, and you're good to go. That's important that the community has a say in that. Because that's on DM's tables, right? I don't want to be rude. I feel kind of rude, like throwing stuff on DM's tables that, like, I can't promise that is going to work, right? Like that.
Now, I will admit I'm a little disappointed because I was hoping for some surprises, but at the same time, staying true to what we've said, and that generally is, if you mess things up on the DM side, it's usually not really a big deal. And we usually say this when we're talking about a lot of like third-party products and things like that. Like if you get a monster wrong or something like that, well, the DM can educate on the fly, or it's going to be in the game for a short period of time. But when you add new player options and you start a campaign, there are things that can haunt your game for years, literally. Depending on how you play. So I understand why you would be more cautious there.
Yeah, and we lose some of that surprise factor, which we're aware of, and it's been interesting to see with the book how well it does, because that was always a thing back when I started in games, in role playing games. There was always this concern you wanted to surprise players, but I think our attitude now is a lot more like, I come from a software background, so I almost think of it as like, okay, if you're releasing an expansion to the game like Xanathar's, it's like an update to an operating system. Like here's the new version of iOS. But players and dungeon masters, rather than being like people who use phones, we think of them as like, these are people who are developing software for our operating system. And they don't want to be surprised, right? It's not fun if you're like, hey, here's my app, and it's like my business, right? This is how I make my living. And there's a new version of iOS. And it totally breaks my app. And now, my customers are mad. And I have no idea how to fix it because I don't know. Like, right? It's where we're trying to surprise people is more in the story-based products, like things like with Volos, where we wanted to be like, okay, we don't, because like you said, since it's more, that book is more monsters, we don't need to show everything off in public, because I think you're exactly right. If a monster's a little off, like, we still playtest everything thoroughly, but if there's something there that having a much bigger crowd playtest, like, okay, we missed out on that, it doesn't really affect the game in the same way. And I think it's worth it to have that fun, like, it's more story. It's more like I'm reading this and learning about the world of D&D. I'm learning about an adventure, things like that, like a Tomb of Annihilation, where it's like, we don't want to give away the twists and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I think we definitely, for player stuff, we definitely want to be upfront. We're not there to surprise people. And then for DM stuff, we are more open to, it's more like, what's the adventure going to be about? And you're not really sure until you get it. Because then it's fun. It makes it fun to read. That's how we also see it too.
Volo's Guide is still my favorite product.
Thank you.
That one is a blast. So diving into the chat, Jacob Stokes, he's got a question, and I actually saw this tweet too and responded to it. You tweeted about Dark Sun. Any chance we'll see some 5e rules for that sometime in the future? That's pretty much was my tweet, I think.
Yeah. So like this past weekend, I've been taking my wife and I and our daughter were taking a lot of long weekend trips. And my daughter, she's a toddler. And the interesting thing about going on a little vacation with a toddler is by 7 o'clock, you're back at the hotel, right? Whereas like when we didn't have a kid, like, we'd be out till whenever, right? Doing stuff or, seeing the sights. So when you're in a hotel room, it's starting at 7 and you're trying to get a toddler to sleep and she's finally asleep, then you're exhausted. You don't really want to do much of anything. I just ended up reading through the second edition, the first Dark Sun box set. And I just got inspired and just started writing stuff for it. So I worked up like they're really like campaign notes right now. So I'm not sure what we're gonna do with them. Like I'm gonna start running a Dark Sun game, and then we'll see like if the rules I wrote are any good. If I like using them. Like if I don't like using them, then clearly this is going nowhere. But then we'll see. Like Unearthed Arcana, we did one on Eberron. And that actually that was a good example of one where it's like, yeah, people weren't really crazy about the implementation of stuff there. But again, it's useful feedback. It kind of tells us a different path to go. So yeah, so I wouldn't be surprised if some of this Dark Sun stuff, like sometime next year, ended up on Unearthed Arcana.
I heard a rumor about that Eberron one. Mm-hmm. That it was kind of done before 5e was actually released and done, and sitting on a shelf, and you guys kind of wheeled it out.
I want to say that, yeah, I think the Warforged may have been something like we were just messing like what would a construct race look like, and also I think it was one of the things where There were some changes between 3E and 4E and Eberron, like not huge changes, but some of them were like, okay, to Warforged, do they wear armor now, or is it still just, at first level, basically that's your armor, like the type of body you were built with, like a mithril or adamantine one. And I can't remember which way the design went, if it let you wear armor or not. But yeah, it was one of the things where I think, well, actually, I think it's a good point. It was made for fairly early on. And so I think you can definitely see, at least I see or I feel, that the design we do now is just much better than the design we were doing 3 years ago. Like, we understand the game. Even though it's funny to say, we made this game, but now we understand it better, right? Like, there's something to that, like you just have a familiarity with it where you are now, I think our instincts are more honed to understand not only what works within the game, but also what makes people excited and gets people interested in things. Because we've done all these play tests now, we did Sword Coast Adventures Guide. We've done 5 or 6 adventures. Now we have Xanathar's coming out, as the first big expansion. I definitely feel like we have a much better grip on the game and a much better understanding and a good connection with the audience. And I think that just is growing stronger. A lot of game design is iteration, right? You do something again and again until you kind of figure out what's the best path forward. And I think that is also reflected in just we have 3 years of experience now under our belts with the game. And it's great. Oh, sorry.
One of the things, like, to speak to what you're saying, that I've noticed, an observation is, well, first off, early on, a lot of this stuff was outsourced and done by other publishers. And honestly, I think the stuff you guys are doing in-house is much better. All the stuff has been really good for 5e. Like, overall, like, I'm very satisfied and happy with this edition. This is like my edition of the game. Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, it's like the best of. It has the best of everything from every edition for me, anyway. You guys just kind of like hit the spot. But from the monster manual to Volo's guide, it seems like you guys really got a much more firm grasp on the challenge ratings and how monsters work and interact.
Oh yeah,
and they're just much better designed.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it was the those first few products that we were working with other companies. That really was a reflection of they were working on those when we were still working on the core rulebooks. Just the way our production schedules go. And so I think that obviously working with an outside studio gave us more bandwidth to do more work. But yeah, it did have the drawback of like we couldn't give them the guide as much guidance, right, as we would now. And so I think that really does play into the you learning more about the system, using it more, and that is something that it's kind of funny. I was thinking about this the other day. Talk about getting mastery. So we're it's been 3 calendar months since the Player's Handbook came out. Actually, a little bit more than that. And this is the first edition I've worked on where we're still working on the same edition. Like when you think about it, in 2000 when 3E came out, like 38 months later. By 38 months later, 3.5 had been out, and with 3.5, 3 years and change later, the team was working on 4th. And with 4th, we were working on at this stage in the game, we had just started working on 5th. So it's been, I think it's something which we haven't had the luxury of, in a long time, not since 2nd edition, having a game that's been relatively stable, without having to reboot, relaunch with a new edition. And so that actually really excites me because, yeah, like we definitely feel like I feel like I just understand things better now. I've run a couple campaigns now, right? Like we have our playtesters have run more, right? So they can spot things much faster. And also the other exciting thing is we have so many new players coming in that you're getting more perspectives on things, and I think that helps keep. Not only does it mean we're getting better at the current game, but I think it's helping us stay relevant to people who aren't yet playing D&D but are interested. We have a big enough proportion of our audience now that's been playing the game for like a year or so that when we get feedback from them, it's more in tune with, okay, these are people who just started playing D&D, so what do they think about this? Is it too complicated? Does it resonate? Does it make sense to them? Like where maybe their cultural markers are more like Harry Potter, whereas I was born in the mid-'70s, so mine is more like, oh, it's like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. I started with the books, right? Where someone who's 25 now would maybe think more, I saw those movies that came out when I was a kid, and they might not even have read the book. They might just know from the movies, things like that. So I think that entire community growing together, it's been a great thing. And I said, it's a huge help for us in keeping the game, the quality levels where we want them.
Now, diving back into the chat, I know they're getting ravenous for me to ask all of their questions, but I don't think we're going to get to all of them because I don't think you have like, a week to sit here with me. And Hangouts will kick us off eventually. So Kendall asked a question about, since we're getting the race-based fees, have you guys thought about doing anything similar with backgrounds?
Oh, that's an interesting question. We haven't thought about feats. We have thought about, this is something we messed around with a little bit for Xanathars, but it didn't really come together in the way we wanted it, but it's still something I'm thinking of doing. And that's the idea of taking backgrounds and extending them to higher levels, in the sense that when you pick a background, you might also pick like a destiny. Like, here's the thing, kind of like 4E had epic destinies, but these are a little bit more grounded in the world. So you might pick noble, and then you might say, oh, my destiny is to become a monarch. And then there would be some things the DM could use, and then some things the players to sort of model that, okay, I'm trying to gain influence and power. I want to, gain a land grant and things like that. So we've kind of thought about more like that, more as a narrative thing, like that kind of gives your character direction. So out of the gate, you kind of know what your character's ambition is. So yeah, we talked a little bit about that.
Cool. I had a question I was kind of thinking about. Ever since we've talked about doing this hangout, I have friends that work for like beer distributors, right?
Mm-hmm.
They cannot be seen drinking other beers in public, or they get fined or lose their job. Other than Dungeons and Dragons, are you playing any other games? Are you allowed to play other games?
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah. No. You're totally. And actually, you have to, right? That's how you stay on top of things. So the big issue I have right now is having a toddler means there's not a lot of gaming time. So over the summer I played a lot of Hearthstone. I used to play a lot of Overwatch, but I don't really have as much time now to play. And that's something I found with competitive games that I really need to keep consistently playing to feel like, oh, my skill level's increasing. I feel satisfied with it. When my schedule's sort of like messed up, it's hard to get a rhythm. And I got back into Warhammer recently, Warhammer 40,000. I've been modeling and playing that. They have a new board game coming out that I think releases next week called Shadespire that I got on pre-order. I think, and it's important because one of the things I think actually I don't think I could do my job well if I didn't play other games, because I think we talked about earlier, like working on D&D and realizing that what my position is. I am in my position where I am. It's very hard. I can't step out and be a member of the audience because I know too much. So it's nice to go play another game and really experience it just purely as a fan and player, and then take insights from there and then bring them to D&D. Like, think about things like, oh, I really like how, there's this new product Games Workshop is releasing. I'm really excited about it. Well, why am I excited about it? And then kind of break that down and go, oh, okay, I kind of get how this, fits into their broader plan, or it's inspiring. Like, oh, okay, I kind of see what they're doing here, and oh, what would the D&D equivalent be? Like, even if it's not something we're going to make, it's just a nice mental exercise to like keep things fresh. Because I think one of the things I would really want to avoid, and this is kind of why Volo's Guide is called Volo's Guide and not Monster Manual 2, is we want to avoid becoming too predictable. Like for some things, like we talk about Xanathar, it's like, okay, you don't want to surprise people because that's not the point. You just want to give them more support, give them more tools. But we also, there is an element of being a fan where like, oh, it's the new thing and it's exciting, right? And it's a surprising thing, the thing you didn't expect you didn't expect that, and it's, you're eager for it. So I think it's good to be able to step out because it means it helps keep things fresh, because I can kind of think of myself as a fan and what got me excited and what that would mean for D&D. And it gives a nice broad perspective on things.
Yeah, I totally get that. Otherwise, everything is happening in this microcosm anyway. I was honestly really excited when I saw that you guys were doing work with like Green Ronin, because of the other publishers out there, that happens to be one of my favorites. We played a ton of Mutants and Masterminds.
Oh, cool.
And like that is probably like my favorite spinoff from 3rd edition.
Yeah,
that kind of got legs for itself and is still out there.
Yeah, and that's actually the last role-playing game book I bought was the Tal'Dorei campaign setting from Green Ronin with for the Critical Role, and Matt Mercer and James Hake, or I don't know how to say his last name. I think I would have met James, but I hope I didn't butcher it. But yeah, so that's actually my bag. It's been one of my books I've been reading. So
Yeah, that kind of dovetails to DM Don's question, and that is how you feel about third party or second party content, third party content, and
Oh, yeah.
I guess you like it.
Yeah, no, it's exactly. I mean, that's why with the Open Gate, the OGL, and the DMs Guild, for us, so much of D&D is about creation, right? And so this is definitely something where you talk about a fan perspective, right? I remember back in the '90s, when Second Edition was out and internet was becoming a thing that was more mainstream, and going on Usenet and seeing TSR threatening to sue anyone who you could, if you post a net book, like a new class, they were threatening to sue you, right? And obviously we need to protect our intellectual property, right? We don't want people to just throw Forgotten Realms on anything. But on the other hand, there is an element of D&D where it's a hobby where people want to make stuff. So I think it's important to enable that and to support it. I mean, that's why we have the DMs Guild, because we know people want that outlet, and that's part of the game and its culture is making stuff and sharing it. And I think it's what helps create that sense of positivity, right? Because it's community of creators. If you're just wantonly tearing everything down, that's not. Why would you be part of that community if that's what you want to do?
What do you think about today's environment for you guys as designers, where back in the 80s and 90s, you just went to work, did your thing in your cubicle, put your head down and made the games, right? And played the games. But now it's like with Twitch and the DMs Guild and social media, like you guys are getting kind of like thrust into the spotlight and you've become like these celebrities. And like everyone on the D&D team, almost, it seems like, is out there doing other things publicly now.
Yeah, no, and I think it really reflects our community. I have a lot of friends who work in video games, especially, and they have to be a lot more guarded. And a lot of that is because with D&D, if I decide, well, Dark Sun's a good example. I just decide, okay, I want to run a Dark Sun campaign, so I can just type out the notes I'm going to use to run it. Whereas if it's a video game, there's far more layers between that concept and then the actual execution. But I also think that it means we have to be a lot more mindful of ourselves. That if we take criticism, hey, I'll admit, right, sometimes you hear a critique or someone is complaining about something, it's natural to something just get like what? Come on, right? But you have to realize, wait a second, this is our community and this is part of the job. And you can be a little grumpy about it, but then you have to realize, look, this is about making the game better. You can't take it personally, and and that's not. It's not like it happens all the time, right? But just sometimes, like there's something like with the. I'm trying to give a good example, right? Especially with Honor of Kenna, not all the subclasses made the cut. So sometimes there are ones in there like the. I think it was the Raven Queen Warlock pack, where I was like, oh, this is. I hope this gets in, right? And it's probably maybe my favorite of all the ones we built. But people didn't like it, right? So you got to be like, okay, that's the benefit of having an engaged community is you get all this insight to help guide your design. The drawback could potentially be that you get grumpy, right? About I don't like this VR, but you can't treat it as a drawback. You've got to say look, this is part of the process. The game's better. I might really like this, but I like it. But does the audience like it? So I think it's being aware that we're stewards of the game. And that also, I think another thing is that we help set the tone for the community. It's important that we're aware of that. We can't get negative. We can't get, we can't set a bad example. And I think that's something which we always have to keep in mind, when we're interacting. We've got to really be very conscious about the community that we want to help build, and we want one that's welcoming, that's open, that's tolerant, and that's a great place for new players. So we have to be very carefully conscious about that and make sure that our actions and statements reflect what we want to see from our players and Dungeon Masters.
Let me rephrase that a little bit. As entertainment. Because you guys are all D&D is on Twitch 5 days a week now.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, who knew, right? I did not. I have to admit, I remember years ago when I had a roommate, I lived in Boston, and we had a mutual friend who would come over and would watch my roommate play video games. And I remember thinking, why would you ever want to do that? Why would you want to watch someone else play a game? And then you think, actually, now that we're on the other side and you're watching Twitch and all this stuff and people Critical Role and people playing, it's wait, this is just like sports or theater, right? Yeah, of course it makes sense. If the game is fun, people will want to watch you play it. And yeah, that is something that I still, and I have to admit, it's nerve-wracking. I ran a game on, we did the Stream of Annihilation to announce Tomb Annihilation and Xanathars. and I had to run a game a Friday evening. It was the last game of the day, and I've got like Matthew Lillard, like the actors there, and I've got people from Critical Role are there, and like I'd met them all, like some of them in passing, but I never really like hung out with them. Like Matt Mercer I'd met a little bit like last year, but then there's there's Marisha at the table and Liam, and it's like, and then Chris Perkins is playing, and it's just like one of those things where like, oh man, I can't screw this up. Right? It's like, and then you have thousands of people watching. It's like, yeah, but it's funny, so my strategy was I took a nap before the game. Like I made myself take a nap. And it totally helped calm me down. And then when I started running the game, I totally forgot we were on camera. It was the weirdest thing. Like I just did not even think of it. And then it was at the end of the session when everyone started clapping. It's like, oh yeah, there was an audience. I totally forgot. And I think that's the thing is you just have to be. I think if you just act as a good dungeon master, it helps get it out there. And I think it connects with people. And I think that's one of the things why I think the role playing game community is more open and supporting than other gaming communities, because it is like you're watching someone else do something that you're going to yourself do. Like it's like a performance, and you realize, hey, I could do that too. And it isn't competitive, right? Like if you're running a game, you're either running it well and people are entertained, or you're learning something about your style. There's no points at the end. You just want everyone to have fun. It's pure entertainment. And I think that mindset really has helped D&D become interesting to stream and people getting into that. And it's definitely something where I never thought I would be in that position of like DMing for a crowd. And I think if I think about it while I'm doing it, I'd probably immediately like turn into a train wreck. As long as I like get my nap in before the session and then just forget that I have an audience and just focus on running the game, I think I'll be okay. But yeah, it's definitely not something. If you told me when we launched Fifth, this is what would be happening, I never would have believed you. Like, no, that's just please, that's just crazy. That's crazy talk,
That fear, I call that the red monster moment from Bugs Bunny.
Oh.
But yeah, and it's kind of like that. Even when I play with my players, I'm just kind of like, well, you just like, especially because we're playing in a hangout, right? So I'm like, it's just us in these little boxes. Don't worry about it. If you don't open up the chat or open up the page, it's it's just us hanging out doing our thing.
Yeah. No, and it's interesting because I think it looks like I'm gonna have a show added to our lineup starting in November. So it's going to be kind of fun. Like I'm excited about it, but I'm also like a little nervous about it. I won't be running a game. It's going to be more like of a game design kind of, chatting and insights into how we build things.
Oh, cool.
But we'll see. We'll see if where that goes, and if then they want me to start DMing online. I think it was fun, and it's kind of, I will never get over the fact that when I was a kid, I thought like I only knew like 3 other people who played D&D, and as far as I was concerned, between the 4 of us, we were the only people in the world to play Dungeons and Dragons. And now today, to see this huge community online, it still blows my mind. I don't think I'll ever really wrap my mind around it fully.
It looks like Chris Lindsey got the bug a little bit.
Yeah, he's got his game going. Yeah. No, and I think it's kind of a thing where Chris Perkins started Dice Camera Action. It's like it's and I gotta admit, as being the father of a toddler, like if I could start running a streaming game at work, then that would guarantee I'm running D&D at least once a week. Because now there's it's on the schedule, right? We got to deliver. So so maybe that's like my reason I should I should be running a game too, just to so I can have a consistent campaign rather than the one that's prone to toddler related disturbances. So,
well, to be honest with you, when we started Nerdarchy, part of that was we were drifting away as a group from the hobby.
Mm-hmm.
So we're like, well, if we kind of made this stuff a business and a job, we kind of have to do it, right?
Oh yeah. So there you go, right?
So I feel like I perpetuated one of the greatest cons ever on my wife, because now she calls my gaming work. Christopher Haskins has a question. Are there additional rules for crafting and alchemy in Xanathar's guide? We're looking for more player downtime activities. Oh, thanks. And that's a question that we've gotten a lot, about crafting and how do you make stuff and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so there were downtime rules we actually had in Unearthed Arcana earlier this year, and those went through playtesting, and those were revised, and those are going to be in the book. So those are there. For alchemy, there isn't anything about alchemy specifically, though there is a section that takes the various tool proficiencies and gives DMs some advice on how to get more use out of them. It isn't; these aren't hard and fast rules for the tools. They're more just suggestions like, hey, if someone took brewer's tools as a proficiency and they don't really feel they're getting a lot out of it, here's some ideas for things that you can basically house rule or as optional rules to add to your game to get more mileage and more use out of it.
So X Sullivan is asking, is there a huge difference between the UA stuff we saw and the stuff that actually gets put into the book, or are you guys just slapping a hardcover on it?
No, there are differences. And typically, so the way the process works is when something goes up in Unearthed Arcana, we have the initial feedback of like, I think we generally ask a question like, do you like this? Yes, no, or whatever. And if it's over 70%, I think that was the margin. That sounds right. And so if it's over that, then we know, okay, it's good to go. Like this is worth taking to the next step. So what typically that means though is you don't see enormous changes because the stuff that was lower ranked was the stuff that typically had more issues, and people are like, okay, this needs more of a redesign. And so a lot of that material, so you will see changes. And in some cases, maybe like abilities might go away and be replaced. But you won't see like wholesale massive rewrites because these were the ones that had the strongest playtest feedback. So there's kind of a chicken and egg thing of like, oh, there's not a lot of changes. Yeah, because these were the ones where people didn't ask for a lot of changes. People were happy with it. They wanted more like, oh, tweak a number, or like this ability doesn't really make sense, but the concept of the ability maybe fits. So we need to kind of rebuild it a bit. The ones that were below 70, you might see those in UA again in the future. If we think the concept was interesting, we then might basically rebuild it from scratch or like significantly rework it to the point where it does need another full round of play testing to confirm what we've done. And I think that's a good way to look at it, that typically these were subclasses that people liked well enough that we had a very clear mandate of what we needed to change. We didn't need to validate our changes with another round of full open play test because like it was clear what people were asking for the changes.
So this next question kind of also dovetails you were saying about legacies, and also to like how I feel about 5th edition is in the sense that you have these big blocks you get to move around and play with, where in 3rd edition it was all about the microtransactions, and if you put enough of those together, something cool and different would happen with your character as opposed to the way things are now. And this is one of the things I was going to ask you about anyway, if I remembered. Adam says, how do you feel about prestige classes? We've seen the Rune Scribe in Unearthed Arcana. Do you think we'll be seeing any more of those? I actually like the concept of the prestige class.
Yeah, it was surprising. I thought it would be a lot more popular in the feedback than it was, because they were such a big part of 3rd. But I think players, generally speaking, feel that like the subclasses have essentially replaced them. So I think that for us, the next step would be, well, is there some other concept that we could add to the game? To give you some more of that customization, especially at higher levels. And it's funny because if you're looking at what we've done with over the course of 5th, we have typically like taken what was a prestige class in 3rd and made it a subclass in 5th. So I think that just kind of fits with the direction, that the kind of the natural design direction. So yeah, that's something where I don't know where we're going to end up with it, because I just think that for a lot of players, the feedback was pretty consistent that people were just like, yeah, that's kind of interesting, but I don't think we don't need another thing. Well, I'll strike that. It wasn't that people were saying we don't need another thing. They're basically saying we don't think we need this thing to be the new thing to add. The idea of a prestige class. So yeah, it's going to be kind of curious to see where we might end up with that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm curious as well, because like I said, I like seeing those big blocks that can be moved around, and also the funny thing is, like, there's a lot of things that we've given like harsh criticisms on, but then we like turn around and play those things in our games. When my brother was still part of Nerdarchy, like his harshest criticism was always the Chaos Sorcerer, Chaos Magic, but that was the first character he played, and he's been playing for years.
We're harshest on the things that we would love the most, right?
And also too, like we talk about things like the Gish and multi-classing and how essentially, like I'm always saying forever, Like, if you can cast a spell or hit it with your sword, you're probably better off casting a spell. But just because things aren't optimized doesn't mean they're not fun. Like,
Exactly.
I'm playing a wizard fighter, and I even built him wrong.
Yeah.
Like I went wizard first because I wanted to be a wizard that fights and not a fighter that wizards.
Cool.
From an optimization. But you guys gave me the tools to do it in 5th edition, where I could be a dwarf and I could wear armor right from
that's right. Yeah.
and use weapons. Like these are things you couldn't really do in previous editions.
Yeah, a lot of it is with experience with the game. When you talk about being able to cast spells and armor and stuff like that. In 1st and 2nd edition, that was forbidden, right? The idea was, oh no, yeah, you just can't. And then I always remember very vividly, I was running a 3rd edition campaign, and one of my players figured out that he could play a Scion and wear armor, because Scions in 3rd edition didn't have a spell chance, a chance of spell failure based on armor. And so he built this character just so he could wear full plate and be a full, essentially, spellcaster as a psionicist. Then after 2 sessions, he was like, "Oh, can I remake my character? Because this is it doesn't matter, right? It wasn't anywhere near as powerful as he thought it would be." And a lot of cases, you learn by playing the game. Right when you first start, if you think of the game theoretically, oh, that makes sense. Wizards are really powerful. Their main weakness is they have low armor class. So if you let them wear armor, they'd be too good. But then as you play the game, you realize, well, no, it's actually more their low hit points that make them really fragile, because there's a lot of stuff in the game that doesn't involve armor class that can threaten you. And so you kind of learn through play what actually is broken and what's not. And even what does broken really mean, right? I think for D&D, we think broken for players is oh, your character is just better than other characters at everything. And you realize okay, being able to wear armor as a wizard doesn't really make me better than the fighter. It means I'm not as reliant on the fighter, but I'm still not going to charge into close combat because I'm bad at that, right? I don't want to be there. So yeah, it's one of those things where it's kind of by playing the game, you sort of learn something that on the face of it seems oh, that would be an issue, but then in actual play, it's yeah, it's not. That's not actually a problem.
It's the difference between reading the novel and playing the game.
Exactly. Yeah.
It looks way cooler when it's cinematic. But that being said, there are definitely some subpar choices you can make that are still a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Like I said, I love playing my Dwarven Wizard fighter. He's got a great armor class. His hit points are a little low, but he never hits as hard as the other fighter in the party or casts spells as the other spellcasters in the party. Yeah, but the key is he can do fun and interesting things. It's we always say multi-classing. People say that's really strong and powerful. I said no, single class is the most powerful thing in the game. It's multi-classing just gives you broad options and interesting things you can do. You can sometimes build these specialty builds that seem more powerful, but when a wizard drops Meteor Swarm, that's a lot of D6s.
It is
from far away. It's not quite the same, in my opinion. So Mike Gould has a question, and he's being really nice with them because he's been a little bit critical of the Warlock in the past. He writes for us and writes a lot of great out of the box encounter articles. So please explain the intent and direction behind the Warlock, especially when they are subpar to casters, martial types, or even hybrids.
So the Warlock is it's tricky because since you get your spells back with a short rest, the Warlock is probably of all the classes the one that's most driven by what style campaign you're playing. If you're playing a campaign where you get lots of short rests, if you short rest after every battle, or especially a campaign where this may sound kind of funny, but if you're playing a campaign with not much combat, the Warlock can be very powerful because you can take short rests all the time. If you're just investigating in a city, you can take that 1 hour rest. You can just, I'm going to go to a tavern and just hang out for an hour and get my spells back. And so it trades in this sort of burst ability. I can more consistently use my abilities if I can rest versus the wizard using their abilities consistently across the day. But the one thing I think people might underrate a little bit with the Warlock is the invocations. Those constant always-on abilities that you get to use to augment your spell casting. If you just look at the Warlock in terms of spell casting, you don't have the depth of power that a wizard might have. Again, especially if you're thinking just in terms of one encounter or one event. But what the Warlock can do is with the right invocations, you can bring into play abilities that for other characters are limited, but that for you are effectively uncapped. And finding that finding that mixture is really important. I think for if you're thinking of building a warlock, especially if you're thinking in terms of like very tactical gaming and being able to contribute to fights, it's important to think of how those two things work together. The one thing I would say with the warlock, I think that if we were going to go back, it's probably the one class that I think could use a bit more clarity in its design. Like I think there are some choice points that are broken up. Like we talked earlier about how like you choose your patron, then you choose like the pack gift you get. Would have been easier to combine those two, or to have gifts that were more worked with the packed, the patron directly rather than being a separate thing. And also, when we added this in Xanathars, we have more invocations that speak directly to some of those elements. Because I do think that's the one thing, especially in the player's handbook, the class is a bit disjointed. One of the things you get, from your patron is you get the list of spells you get automatically. But it's sort of, I think looking back, like it's nice you get these spells for free. But since your spells are your most hard capped thing, like you don't have as many spell slots as other characters, giving you more spells doesn't necessarily make you feel more powerful. It makes you feel versatile, but your versatility is resting in your most limited resource. We saw the same thing with the monk of the 4 elements, where the 4 elements abilities all use key. And people aren't really crazy about that because they also want to use their key for all the other stuff that, say, the way of the open hand. I think it's whatever. The more traditional monk doesn't have as many demands on their key, and so therefore they feel more powerful because the abilities they're getting aren't tapping into a limited resource. So I think that's where you might feel that, where I don't think the warlock has quite the cohesion other classes have, and it's very easy to make. It's probably the warlock's probably the easiest class to like where you really have to make sure your choices are lining up, and it's very easy to look at this might work together, but then find out in play it's not doing what you want. So.
I when I look at like the invocations, I always am like, all right, this adds a spell to my spell list, Chuck.
Right? Yeah, exactly. It's just like, it's just, hey, at 10 o'clock my time I have to go. So we have about, I think probably time for like one more question. I think I've got about three minutes to, I'm getting my little alerts on my computer that I have a meeting coming up. So.
Okay. So, all right. So we got Jim Davis from WebDM Theme. A few weeks ago on Twitter, you made a comment that seemed to suggest there would be only one adventure path per year. Can you clarify?
Oh, yeah. So our intention is that in terms of like the big adventures, like Tomb of Annihilation, right now our plan is that we do one of those a year, and that the other products we do are more up in the air. So you can kind of reliably count on there's the one main campaign, so the follow-up to Tomb of Annihilation next year at some point. And that the other products, especially as the edition matures, we'll probably start doing things that are a little bit more experimental or changing up the order in which we release things, or, like I said earlier, we want to avoid getting into a rut where we're too predictable. So, yeah, I think we're pretty strongly committed to doing the once a year campaign in a book. But then the other products we do, that's going to become a bit more as, we're hitting the point now with editions almost 4, it's 3 years old. People have kind of seen the basics, and so now the interesting question is, what do we do next to keep people excited? So you'll probably see us doing some things that maybe you didn't expect. Hopefully we're surprising people in a good way.
So Ranger Warrior kind of has like a follow-up question to that.
Mm-hmm.
Will there be more publications like Tales of the Yawning Portal?
Yeah, that book did very well for us, and so we definitely know people. There is demand for like the shorter adventures. More like the 20 to 30 page range. So I wouldn't be surprised if like in the next couple of years we did something similar. Maybe along a similar theme. I think that's something that's kind of nice. Say, this is the book with dungeons, right? And so maybe do something similar with a different type of adventure. So.
All right. So I know you have to go. You have a meeting to get to. So we'll wrap things up here, guys. I'm sorry for all the questions I didn't get to. There's a ton of them. I want to thank you guys for hanging out. Mike, I want to thank you for coming on. Obviously, you guys always have an open invitation. Anybody from the WOTC staff that wants to come hang out for an hour, we do these things Monday through Friday. You're more than welcome. So with that, until next time, guys, stay nerdy.
Cool. Thanks for having me.